Imagine being accused of stealing in front of an entire plane, while everyone watches, judges, and whispers. That's exactly what happened to 17-year-old Jaden when a flight attendant stopped him over a pair of headphones he actually owned. But what happened next left the entire crew speechless, because the one person they doubted the most turned out to be connected to someone who could change everything. Stay with me. This story will make you question how quickly we judge others. The moment the flight attendant's voice cut through the cabin, everyone turned. "Sir, those headphones don't belong to you." The words landed like a sudden jolt, snapping the quiet comfort of the flight into tension. Conversations faded. Heads turned. Even the soft hum of the engines seemed to fall into the background. 17-year-old Jaden froze in his seat, his fingers still resting lightly on the sleek, expensive headphones covering his ears. For a second, he thought he had misheard her. Slowly, he slipped them off, his expression shifting from relaxed to confused. "I'm sorry," he asked calmly, blinking as he looked up at her. The flight attendant stood firm in the aisle, arms crossed tightly across her chest, her posture rigid with authority. "Those are premium airline headphones," she said, her tone sharp and unwavering. "You can't just take them." A ripple of whispers spread through the nearby rows. Did he really take them? "They look expensive. I saw him sitting there earlier." Passengers leaned slightly into the aisle, pretending not to stare, but clearly watching every second. Some exchanged knowing looks, while others simply shook their heads, already convinced they understood what was happening. Jaden glanced down at the headphones in his hands, then back at her, trying to process the accusation. "They're mine," he said politely, keeping his voice steady despite the growing attention. "I brought them with me." But the flight attendant's expression didn't soften. "I saw you pick them up after boarding," she snapped, her voice louder now, drawing even more attention. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. If you don't return them now, I'll have to report this." The tension in the cabin thickened instantly, like the air had been pulled tight. Jaden swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. He could feel dozens of eyes locked onto him, weighing him, judging him. His heart began to pound, not out of guilt, but out of the pressure of the moment. This wasn't just about a pair of headphones anymore. It felt bigger, unfair, uncomfortable. "I didn't take anything," he said, his voice still calm but firmer now, trying to ground himself. The woman tilted her head slightly, clearly unconvinced. "Then explain why I saw you with them after boarding," she challenged. Jaden exhaled slowly, forcing himself not to react emotionally. "Because I put them on after I sat down," he replied. "That doesn't mean they weren't mine." A man across the aisle leaned toward his companion and whispered, not quietly enough, "This is getting awkward." Another passenger muttered, "Why doesn't he just give them back?" Jaden heard it all. Every word, every assumption. His grip tightened slightly around the headphones. Not out of anger, but out of frustration. He wasn't being heard. Not really. Every word he said seemed to bounce off a wall of doubt that had already been built around him. "I can show you my bag," he offered, trying to stay reasonable. "The case is in there." But the flight attendant didn't move. Instead, she shook her head. "That won't be necessary," she said coldly. "What's necessary is that you return airline property immediately." Jaden leaned back slightly in his seat, disbelief flashing across his face. "You're not even going to check?" he asked. Her silence answered him, and in that moment, Jaden realized something that made his chest feel heavy. This situation wasn't really about the headphones anymore. It was already spiraling into something much harder to stop. Within minutes, another crew member joined, then a supervisor. The attention only made things worse. What had started as a quiet accusation had now turned into a full scene in the middle of the cabin. People who had been minding their own business were now openly watching. Some leaned into the aisle. Others pretended to scroll on their phones while clearly listening to every word. "Is there a problem here?" the supervisor asked, his voice calm but authoritative as he stepped forward. "Yes," the flight attendant replied quickly, almost relieved to have backup. She gestured toward Jaden. "This passenger is refusing to return airline property." Jaden shook his head immediately, sitting up straighter in his seat. "I told you these are mine," he said, trying to keep his tone respectful despite the growing pressure. The supervisor turned his attention to Jaden, his eyes scanning him from head to toe. It wasn't just a glance. It felt like an assessment, a judgment being formed in seconds. "Do you have proof of purchase?" the supervisor asked. The question hit harder than it should have. Jaden hesitated for a brief moment. "Not on me," he admitted honestly. Then he added, a little more firmly, "But I don't need proof for something I already own." That answer didn't help. If anything, it made the atmosphere worse. The supervisor's expression tightened slightly, and the flight attendant crossed her arms again, as if that confirmed everything she believed. Around them, the murmurs grew louder. He probably just took them. Why would he lie about something like that? Kids these days think they can get away with anything. Each whisper felt like a weight pressing down on Jaden's chest. He could hear every word, even the ones people thought were quiet enough to go unnoticed. His jaw tightened. He knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't new to him. Being judged before being understood, being doubted before being heard. It was a feeling he recognized all too well. And no matter how calmly he spoke, it never seemed to change the first impression people had already decided on. "I'm not a thief," he said, louder this time. His voice cut through the noise for a brief second, drawing everyone's attention back to him. There was no anger in his tone, just frustration, and something deeper, something tired. But even then, it wasn't enough. The words seemed to vanish into the air, swallowed by doubt and assumptions that had already taken hold. The supervisor let out a slow sigh, as if this situation was becoming an inconvenience rather than a misunderstanding. "Sir," he said, his tone now more firm, "we can handle this the easy way or the hard way." A quiet tension spread through the cabin at those words. Jaden leaned back in his seat, disbelief flashing across his face. His fingers tapped lightly against the armrest as he tried to process what he was hearing. "The easy way or the hard way," he repeated, almost in disbelief. Then he looked directly at the supervisor. "Or you could just listen to me." For a moment, there was silence. A chance, just a small one, for someone to pause, to reconsider, to actually hear him out. But it passed just as quickly. The supervisor didn't respond to his point. The flight attendant didn't move. The surrounding passengers remained locked in their quiet judgments. No one asked to check his bag. No one asked for more explanation. No one gave him the benefit of the doubt. And in that moment, Jaden realized something that stung more than the accusation itself. He wasn't being treated like someone telling the truth. He was being treated like someone who had already been decided guilty. And no matter what he said, no one was really listening. Trying to keep his composure, Jaden reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His hands were steady, but only just. Inside, his thoughts were racing. The whispers, the stares, the accusations, it was all building pressure. Still, he refused to let it show. "I'm calling my dad," he said. The words caught the crew's attention immediately. The flight attendant raised an eyebrow, and the supervisor exchanged a quick glance with her, clearly unimpressed. "That won't change anything," the supervisor replied coldly, his tone dismissive. Jaden didn't argue. He didn't try to convince them anymore. Instead, he simply unlocked his phone and dialed. The ringing felt louder than it should have. Once, twice. Then, finally, the call connected. "Hey, Dad." Jaden's tone shifted slightly. He wasn't scared, but there was a seriousness in his voice now, something more focused. "I'm on the flight, yeah," he continued, glancing briefly at the crew standing over him. "There's a situation." He paused, listening carefully to the voice on the other end. Around him, the cabin had gone unusually quiet. Even the passengers who had been whispering before were now paying close attention, curious to see what would happen next. Jaden nodded faintly as his father spoke. Then he added, clearly and calmly, "They're accusing me of stealing my own headphones." A few passengers exchanged looks. Some smirked, clearly thinking this was just a teenager trying to scare his way out of trouble. The supervisor rolled his eyes and checked his watch, clearly irritated. "Sir, we don't have time for this," he muttered, loud enough for others to hear. But Jaden didn't react. He stayed focused on the call. "Yeah," he continued, his voice steady. "Flight number 782. Another pause. Then, with a slight glance toward the supervisor, he added, "You might want to handle it." There was something subtle in the way he said it. Not arrogant, not threatening, just certain. A quiet confidence. He ended the call without another word and slipped his phone back into his pocket. Then he sat there, calm, still, waiting. For a moment, nothing happened. The flight attendant let out a small breath, clearly unconvinced. The supervisor shook his head slightly, as if this had all been a waste of time. "Are we done here?" he said under his breath. A couple of passengers smirked again, called his dad like that was going to fix it. Kids these days. The tension didn't disappear, but it shifted into something almost awkward, like everyone was waiting for something that clearly wasn't going to happen. But then, a sharp ringtone cut through the silence. The supervisor's phone. He frowned, clearly not expecting it. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled it out and glanced at the screen. His expression flickered, just for a second, before he turned slightly away from the crowd and answered. "Hello." His tone was routine at first, professional, but that changed quickly, almost instantly. Yes, he's here," he said, his posture straightening. A pause followed. As he listened, the color in his face began to shift. The confidence he had been holding on to just moments ago started to slip. "I understand, of course," he added quickly. Another pause, this time longer. The cabin was completely silent now. Every eye was on him. When he finally ended the call, his hand lowered slowly, almost stiffly, and when he turned back, he wasn't the same person who had taken the call. The authority in his stance had faded. The certainty in his expression was gone, replaced by something else, something far more uncomfortable. His eyes briefly met Jaden's, then quickly looked away. The confidence had disappeared, and in its place was something close to panic. The supervisor walked back slowly, his face pale. Just moments ago, he had stood tall, confident, completely in control of the situation. Now his steps felt heavier, uncertain. His grip on authority had clearly slipped, and everyone in the nearby rows could see it. The flight attendant leaned slightly toward him, her voice low and anxious. "What happened?" He hesitated for a second, glancing around as if to make sure no one else would hear. Then he leaned in closer and said quietly, "That was corporate." Her eyes widened instantly. "Corporate?" He gave a tight nod. "The parent company." For a split second, she froze. And then, it clicked. The confidence she had been holding on to vanished, just as quickly as his had. Her posture stiffened, and her gaze slowly shifted toward Jaden, who was still seated calmly, watching everything unfold without saying a word. Around them, the tension in the cabin shifted again, but this time, it was different. The curiosity, the judgment, the whispers, they were all replaced by something else. Uncertainty. The supervisor cleared his throat, trying to regain some sense of control, though it was clear things had already changed. He forced a polite smile and stepped closer to Jaden. "Sir," he began, his tone now noticeably softer, almost careful. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding." Jaden looked up at him, one eyebrow lifting slightly. "A misunderstanding," he repeated. There was no anger in his voice, just a quiet disbelief. "Yes," the supervisor continued, his words coming out more cautiously now. "We've been informed that your father is—" He stopped mid-sentence. For the first time since this began, he seemed unsure of how to continue. Jaden held his gaze for a brief moment. Then he said it for him. "The owner." Silence. It wasn't just quiet, it was complete stillness. The entire row froze. Passengers who had been whispering just moments earlier now sat motionless, their expressions shifting from judgment to shock. A few people glanced at each other, as if silently replaying everything they had just witnessed. "Yes," the supervisor admitted, his voice lower now. "Your father owns the airline's parent company." The words hung in the air, heavy, unavoidable. The flight attendant's face drained of color. Her earlier confidence was completely gone, replaced by a mixture of shock and realization. Her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to say something, but for a moment, no words came out. I didn't know," she finally stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Jaden looked at her, not angrily, not aggressively, but firmly. "You didn't ask," he said. The simplicity of those words hit harder than any accusation ever could. Because it was true. No one had asked him where the headphones came from. No one had asked to check his bag. No one had taken even a moment to consider that he might be telling the truth. They had looked at him and decided. Around them, the silence deepened. A man across the aisle slowly looked down at his hands, avoiding eye contact. Another passenger shifted uncomfortably in their seat. The same people who had whispered before now seemed unsure of where to look. The atmosphere had completely changed. What started as suspicion had turned into realization. What felt like certainty had become embarrassment. And at the center of it all, Jaden remained calm, composed in a way that made the moment even more powerful. Because he hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't argued endlessly. He had simply told the truth. And now, finally, everyone could see it. Not because they chose to listen, but because they were forced to face what they had assumed all along. The supervisor straightened his uniform, trying to recover what little authority he had left. His movements were stiff, almost mechanical, like he was holding himself together under pressure. "We sincerely apologize for the inconvenience, sir." Jaden looked at him for a long second. "Inconvenience," he repeated, his voice calm, but there was a sharp edge beneath it now. "You accused me of stealing. In front of everyone." The words didn't come out loud, but they carried weight, enough to make the entire row feel even smaller. No one spoke. The hum of the aircraft filled the silence, but even that seemed distant compared to the tension hanging in the air. Passengers who had been so quick to whisper before now sat completely still, avoiding eye contact, pretending to be focused on anything else. The supervisor swallowed, but no response came. Because there wasn't one. Jaden continued, his voice steady, controlled. "I didn't need my father's name for you to treat me with respect," he said. "I just needed you to listen." That line settled deeply into the moment. It wasn't just directed at the crew. It echoed through the entire cabin. The flight attendant lowered her gaze, her earlier confidence completely gone. Her hands, once firmly crossed, now rested awkwardly at her sides. "I'm truly sorry," she said quietly, and this time it sounded real. Jaden studied her for a moment, not with anger, but with a calm seriousness that made the moment feel even more important. He wasn't looking for revenge or embarrassment, just acknowledgement, just understanding. After a brief pause, he gave a small nod. "I hope you remember this next time," he said, "because not everyone you judge will have someone to call." That sentence landed even heavier than the last. A quiet truth, one that didn't need to be repeated. Around them, a few passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The earlier whispers, the assumptions, the quiet judgments, they all felt distant now, replaced with reflection, and for some, quiet regret. Jaden leaned back into his seat. Without another word, he placed the headphones back over his ears, the same headphones that had caused the entire situation. But everything was different now. No one questioned him. No one whispered. No one even looked at him the same way. Because the story had changed. What started as a simple accusation had become something much bigger. It was no longer about a pair of headphones. It was about assumptions. About how quickly people decide who someone is without knowing anything about them. About how easily a situation can spiral when no one takes a moment to truly listen. And most of all, it was about respect. The kind that shouldn't depend on who you are, who you know, or what power stands behind you. As the plane continued its journey through the sky, the cabin slowly returned to normal. Conversations resumed. Flight attendants moved through the aisle again, and the tension began to fade. But something had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Because every person who witnessed that moment carried something with them. A quiet reminder of what they had seen, and what it meant. And long after the flight would land, one thing was certain. This wasn't a moment anyone on board would forget. If this story made you think twice about how we judge others, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful, eye-opening stories like this. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload, and share this with someone who needs to hear this message. Thanks for watching, and remember, respect should never depend on who someone is. See you in the next video.